I talked to you all about how to form the preterit of regular tense verbs, and here's kind of a review. You have a stem, you take the ending off, and then you add the endings that go with the verb that you have. If it's an AR verb, you add these AR endings. If it's an ER verb, you add these ER endings. And if it's an IR verb, you add IR endings, which are the same as the ER endings. But if it's a regular verb, you don't touch the stem. However, there are some irregular verbs, and what makes a verb irregular is the fact that you are either going to add endings that don't normally go with, like if it's an AR verb, you're not going to necessarily have AR endings added to the end of the verb, or if it's an ER verb, it's going to not necessarily have ER endings, or you mess with the stem. Okay, so these are our first three irregularities, and there are potentially others that fall in their group. Actually, let me get rid of this. Okay, so if we start with buscar. Okay, you say this word buscar. It has a hard C sound in the infinitive form. If I started to conjugate this verb out, okay, so like I said before, buscar has the hard C sound in its infinitive form. If I want to take buscar and start conjugating it, what I would do is start adding these endings. So if it's for, actually, let's maybe move it over here. Let's put buscar here. So if I did what I was supposed to do, and I just wanted to keep its stem, this is this, here, let me do a different color. This is the stem, whoops. This is the stem right here. I would keep the stem, and I would take off the AR, and I would start adding these endings to my stem, okay? So if I did that, what I would have is, I'm going to write them over here and move them over. I would have this. And I would add the O there, busco. Okay, so if I did what I was supposed to do and kept my stem and just added the endings to it, then this is what I would have. Busé, buscaste, buscó, buscamos, buscastes, buscaron. The problem is right here. That if I do this, I now have a C next to an E, whereas in the infinitive, which I'll have to write over here since I deleted it out. I can't get it. Go. Okay. Over here, what I have is a C next to an A in the infinitive. And in all these other combinations, I have either a C, actually let me go back and make that different color. I have a C next to an A or a C next to an O. Well, if you remember when we talked about the letter C, C next to A, O, U, or any other consonant sounds like a K. But when we put C next to an E or an I, it sounds like a sa. So this is buscar, and then this conjugations are busé, buscaste, buscó, buscamos, buscastes, buscaron. Most of the time we want, even though we're changing the endings, we want our stem to sound somewhat similar so that we know we're still talking about the same verb. Busé does not sound like buscar, buscar, buscaste, buscó. We've lost that hard C sound, and we would like to keep it. So to keep it, we actually have to make a spelling change. The only other combination that makes the K sound is QU. And so to conserve that K sound, we actually conjugate buscar in the yo form. We change the C to a QU before we add the E. That's how we keep the K sound. Okay, so anytime you have a CAR verb and you're conjugating it into the preterit tense, if it's an AR verb, you're gonna, whenever you end up with a C next to an E, we're gonna want to change that C to a QU. Okay, that's how we keep the k sound, which is more important than it being spelled the same, is now it sounds the same. Okay, so now we have buscar, busqué, buscaste, buscó, buscamos, buscastes, buscaron. Okay. Okay, a similar situation happens with the letter G because there's two sounds to G as well. So if I have the verb llegar, that's also an AR verb, and I want to conjugate it out, I would do the same thing. Here is my stem, yeg, and I would get rid of my ending, my AR, okay, to conjugate it out. And if I just do what I'm supposed to, like if I do that and I start adding AR endings, this is what I'm going to have. Okay, so if I start conjugating it out, here are my AR endings. I would have, if I don't do anything to it, this is what I would have. Yehe, yejas, yejaste, llegaste, llegó, llegamos, llegasteis, llegaron. Take everything. Llegué, llegaste, llegó, llegamos, llegasteis, llegaron. Okay? So if I conjugated it out, if I followed the rules for a regular verb, this is what I would have. Again, I would have a problem because G next to an A sounds like a G, which is what I have up here. This is G. G next to an O also sounds like a G. Okay, so these conjugations all match the sound that we have in our infinitive verb. However, right here, G next to an E sounds like a H. So this would be llegué, llegaste, llegó, llegamos, llegastes, llegaron. Well, in Spanish, it's more important that we conserve the sound. And how we can conserve the sound, how we can get the hard G next to an E, is by plugging in a silent U. So when we conjugate this verb, we would actually have it as, okay, so if I have my llegar for the yo form, what I would do, because I'm going to put an E here, and I want that E to not remove the G sound of my G, I put a U in here. Okay, so instead of writing, you would have to add a U. And that conserves the sound. That's how I get llegué, llegaste, llegó, llegamos, llegastes, llegaron. So anytime you have a verb that ends in GAR and you conjugate it into the preterite tense, you are going to want to put a U in the yo form to conserve that G sound. You don't need to do it for any of the other forms, just for the yo form. Okay, there's one more one more in this group. It's the ZAR verbs. Okay, so if I start conjugating out comenzar and I don't do anything to it, I would have comenzamos, comenzasteis, comenzaron. Okay, now, although I don't think sound-wise there's a problem here, in Spanish, they never like to have Z next to an E. You'll remember that when you were making words plural, like when you had the word lápiz, for example, let's see, if you had lápiz and you wanted to make it plural, you didn't write lapices, you had to change it to a C, lapices. And the same thing with luz, it became luces. So in Spanish, they never like to have Z next to an E. So whenever that situation arises, they want you to change your Z to a C. And so whenever you have ZAR verbs and you're conjugating them into the preterite tense, for the yo form, you're going to change your Z to a C before you add the E. And it only applies in the yo form because for all the other forms, that's not a problem. You have Z next to an A or Z next to an O, which is fine. It's just the E.